copper man. But God bless the child that's got his own, that's got his own.
To the turn of the century, there has always been a black middle class. They were barbers, caterers, teachers, self-employed businessmen, ministers, undertakers, and skilled artisans. Many were mulattoes, light-complexion offsprings of slave women and white masters who were successful in acquiring some education and hired by wealthy white clients to provide specialized services. Others were skilled laborers who migrated to the north, learned to read and write, and succeeded in the industrialized factories of the urban communities.
Their emergence was a long and difficult process that created the black middle strata, a group seeking a better way of life. This was an important group, a group that would go on to become leaders like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and like those who founded the NAACP.
They don't come no more.
In the 1950s, a leading sociologist named E. Franklin Frazier published his views of the frustrations and insecurities of middle-class black Americans. He analyzed the behavior, values, and attitudes of an isolated group rejected by the white world and cut off from its own cultural traditions. His study, The Black Bourgeoisie.
The book evoked negative feelings from blacks, from black people in the middle class, because he felt that Frazier had erred and committed the sin of, as it were, airing the dirty linen of the black middle class in public. The kind of image that is conjured up in my mind is of a black person who was primarily concerned with the trappings of life, the symbols of success without any real substance. Things like having a Cadillac, for instance, being able to dress in a certain way, for instance, being able to go to certain nightclubs and so on and so forth. Something without any real substance.
After Frazier's study was published, to be called bourgeois in the black community was considered to be either an insult or a compliment, depending upon a person's quest for status and the trappings of society, a theme which re-emerges later in the 1980s.
The 1960s brought on the civil rights movement. The black middle strata made greater gains during the next 10 years than during the previous 50 years. Why? Because desegregation of schools, public accommodations, employment quotas, and affirmative action made it possible for blacks to become well-educated and obtain jobs in areas never thought of before. No longer were blacks restricted to religious and teaching occupations. Now the white-collar and professional marketplace opened with employment opportunities in management, medicine, law, and marketing. Blacks then could shop anywhere and obtain the finest goods and accommodations that money could buy.
According to a study by University of Maryland sociologist Bart Landry entitled The New Black Middle Class, between 1960 and 1970, the black middle class doubled in size, achieving a growth rate of 106.8%. However, between 1970 and 1980, the black middle class rate of growth declined to 61.9%. Whites experienced just the opposite. Their middle class increased faster in the 1970s than in the 1960s. If the black middle class had developed at the same rate in the 1970s as in the 1960s, Landry writes, there would have been almost 4.5 million blacks in the middle strata, instead of 3.5.
It's the 1980s, and the new black middle strata has emerged. They've climbed into the ranks of corporate America. They established successful enterprises. They are called Buppies, black urban professionals, the middle-class counterparts of Yuppies, their white co-workers. But who are they, and how are they defined as middle class?
These are young people who have gone to colleges and who have moved into the so-called mainstream. They have not really had to fight the tough battles that black folks have fought a generation before them. The way has been paved somewhat for them, and they have profited from the fruits of others' labors, and that's what we wanted. We wanted our children to have a better life than we had.
When we return, we'll take a look at 3 examples of the black middle class: the 2-career marriage, the single male, and the single parent. Stay with us.
To examine the middle strata, we must first attempt to define this group. Economists and sociologists debate defining the black middle class. Should it be by income or occupation? Dr. Ben Whitten of the Baltimore Urban League.
So I'm not sure I can give you a sharp definition for middle class, because middle class is somewhat judged on income. And if the income is from one person, that's something different from the income being from several persons in the household working. But generally speaking, we'd be thinking of a combined income or a household income of $35,000 to $40,000.
To examine the middle strata in America more closely, we take a look at the 2-career marriage, the single parent, and the single male.
Good morning, Eric Lamberson. Okay, how are you doing today? What can I do for you?
I grew up in a small town in northeastern North Carolina called Plymouth. I'm one of 6 siblings. Neither of my parents are educated. My father, I guess, finished about the 7th grade. My mother did do some high school work, but basically come from, I guess, what you would consider a blue-collar background. I graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 1974 with a Bachelor of Science degree. While still in the Coast Guard, I began attending the Johns Hopkins University Evening College and graduated from there in 1981 with a degree in mechanical engineering. I personally feel like it's unfortunate, but it's just one of the results of being in a capitalistic society. But as a black person, I think when we focus in on the different classes, that's just one more way to segment us as a population of people. And I think that for me, I don't really have to go around and, saying, hey, I'm in the black middle class. I think that as a group of people, we really have other things that we need to be focusing on instead of really doing things to segment the population into different classes.
We start from zero, and we reach the stage where we can almost do anything we want to do. We can purchase almost anything we want. We can travel normally when we want to. We're involved in a lot of the family activities where the whole family actually, go on trips together, or the Cub Scouts. We take karate lessons together. And we can afford these things. The kids are exposed to the arts. My daughter, we have a piano teacher come over and teaches her. My son is taking violin lessons. So I think so. I think we finally reached a point where money, basically, we have enough to survive.
Before getting married, we sat at the kitchen table and we wrote our objectives as to what we wanted to do once we got married. And so far, we have met all the goals that we had planned for ourselves.
We just gear ourselves towards the growth of our children. We want them to be exposed to most of the things that I was going to say we weren't exposed to. That's not necessarily true.
We never had the opportunity of being exposed to.
We have definitely set a goal or an objective that every check we receive, 5% is going towards their education. They should have an opportunity. They can almost pick the school of their choice if they qualify for it.
I do come from very humble beginnings. As a matter of fact, I spent a good portion of my early childhood growing up in the McCullough projects in downtown Baltimore. So it wasn't until the 1960s when blacks began to increase their social and economic status that my father was able to move the family away from the inner city. There's 7 of us all together and plenty of cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents. I do have a 16-year-old, and being a single parent, I've raised him alone. But because of the large family, their love and support, it has not been a major task in raising him at all. I think Buppie is more of a social stigma that's been attached to young professionals who want a better way of life. If they feel that they're comfortable in the BMW or the Mercedes, as long as they can afford it, who cares what they call them? I don't mind being called a Buppie. Friends, family sometimes accuse me of being a Buppie, and I wear it proudly.
But what about the trappings, like vacations in the Caribbean, Mercedes and BMWs, the homes in Columbia, Ashburton, and on Madison Avenue? How important are these luxuries to the black middle class?
In my opinion, it doesn't make sense for someone to go out and buy a $50,000 automobile and they're paying rent. That just doesn't make sense to me.
You owe it to yourself to get the best in life that you can, because you only go around once. And if it's out there and you can afford it and you feel good doing it, then go for it.
We need one, good health. That's a must. We need a good mind. And most of all, we need the freedom to choose. Aside from that, everything else is replaceable. Those are the things that cannot be replaced.
Does the black middle strata have any real commitment to the underclass?
Oh, I think so. I think, though, that there are enough resources within this large and growing group of educated blacks making decent salaries to do a better job of helping some or helping more of the youngsters who haven't made it yet or whose families haven't made it yet.
I do not know that this is happening with the degree of frequency that I would like to see it happening. So I guess in answer to your question, making of the contribution that needs to be made in a substantive area, I don't think is being made with the same degree, with the degree of frequency that I would like to see it being made.
And are today's Buppies merely a carbon copy of their white counterparts?
No, I don't even consider that at all. I just know that there's a certain lifestyle that I feel most comfortable with. And if material things are interspersed with those, then so be it.
I think there would be some areas of my life that would be considered a carbon copy. Just because of the fact that I'm in an environment where it's predominantly white environment. You know, most of the people I work with are white. I interact with white people as far as my career is concerned. And I do have people that I socialize with sometimes that are white.
Yes, I think so. By definition, yes. If we're looking at middle class as a combination or encompasses occupation, it encompasses what income, a way of life, I think so.
They're living in two worlds, and many of us live in 2 worlds or 3 worlds, and we do that for survival. But so long as we're not kidding ourselves about what some of the real issues are, then I think that we can look back and bring some other folks along with us.
Our topic tonight is From Bourgeois to Buppie, and when we come back, we'll talk with our 3 experts on the emerging black middle class. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to City Line. To help us in our discussion, we're joined by three eminent sociologists who are going to help us along. Let me begin by introducing Dr. Bart Landry, who is author of The New Black Middle Class and is also an associate professor of sociology at the University of Maryland and a visiting scholar at the Joint Center for Political Studies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next is eminent sociologist Jeannie Guy, who's with the Baltimore County Department of Personnel. Thanks for being here. Followed by Professor Martin Kilson, who is an associate professor of sociology at Harvard University. I want to thank all of you for being here.
Welcome.
Let's begin with trying to get an understanding of bourgeois. You know, we mentioned that we started looking at a black middle class sometime around the turn of the century and have tracked it over a period of time. Can we use the two terms, can we intersperse the two? Are they the same? When we say middle class, are we necessarily saying bourgeois and vice versa?
Well, I think bourgeois has a different connotation. Bourgeois really took on a negative connotation. It implied a group of people who are very self-centered in their lifestyle, in their aspirations, in the things they did. And middle class really doesn't have a negative connotation. It just says where you are in the economy. You have a pretty good job that with good income, stable, and you're able to afford the kind of things that we associate with the American dream.
Mm-hmm. And you also ascribe to a certain lifestyle, a middle-class lifestyle. But in agreement with what Bart is saying, but going a little further back, Karl Marx talked about the bourgeoisie as being those that owned the means of production, those that could provide for themselves and had people working for them. They actually owned the money, they owned the capital, they owned the equipment, and they paid people to produce.
Well, was this then ironic that E. Franklin Frazier would call the group that he settled on the black bourgeoisie, if you indeed adopt that definition from Marx?
Yeah, I mean, that was a misnomer. That I'm not sure why Frazier did it. One of the reasons might be because his book was already originally written in French, and there it was called bourgeoisie noire. And bourgeoisie was a term that was familiar in French, and it was translated. It would have been more accurate to call it middle class rather than the bourgeoisie.
Now, I have reread the black bourgeoisie, and I want to know, after all these years and looking back at it, why do you think, Professor Kilson, that he held the black bourgeoisie to such, in such scorn or disdain and actually caricatured them in a way?
Well, I think partly because Frazier worked and lived among a sector of the black American middle class that had a lot of frivolity attached to it, I'm afraid. I mean, a sector in Washington, D.C. And he thought that that was the universe of being black middle class, which it is not. And not only is the term bourgeois or bourgeoisie a term used for people who own capital, which is right, but I think it's best used for people who give leadership, who give direction.
I think there are some other dimensions to the black middle class that we might want to consider from a historical perspective, and that is skin color. Oftentimes, light-skinned blacks would consider themselves middle class because they had light skin and curly hair or straight hair.
Which meant that they were descendants
Which meant that they were descendants of slave masters. And so that alone would give them a certain type of status. Now, later on, they were able to get better jobs, have access to more opportunities in the society because of their skin color and the texture of their hair. However, now, the emphasis is on not only content of character, but on the skills and abilities that one brings to the employment office, to the boardroom, or wherever that person may be, regardless as to the shade of their skin or the texture of their hair.
Are we then looking at a difference?
Or the physiognomy that they portray, if they have Negroid features, if you look evidently black like I do, or if you would tend to be sort of marginal, where you weren't able to distinguish if you were of the black race or of the white race, or mixed.
Okay, but are we looking at a difference now then in definition of middle class? Were there certain things that were part of the middle class in the 1950s and 60s that is different in the 70s and 80s?
But those things, I mean, didn't define the middle class even in the 50s or the 40s. Those things defined the status structure of the black community, who were seen as the most desirable people within the community. I mean, if you go far back enough, blacks who worked in the homes of rich whites shared the highest status in the community. Caterers in downtown restaurants, or head waiters in downtown restaurants. Those were all status considerations, nothing to do with class.
BT?
Yeah, let's take a question from our studio audience. Yes, sir.
I believe that the black people who are rising towards prominence and are in a race to achieve middle class status have forgotten about their children and forgot to teach them the values and instill in them the knowledge that they have to work to get what they want instead of giving it to them. You believe that it will ruin a whole generation of children because we are spoon feeding them and turning them into the partiers and the people who want to achieve for themselves?
I think enjoying a wholesome and full life has always been a part of Americans. And we are part of America. We are Americans. We just happen to be black. So partying is a part of our lifestyle, a part of our history. But I don't think that we are not passing on values to younger generations. I think that we are. They're still going to school, they're being educated, they are still going to church, they are still working part-time jobs to augment their income from parents to educate themselves. So I can't see that that's a real consideration at this point.
The middle class has found out is that having reached the middle class doesn't mean you automatically are able to live the way you expected to be able to live. Blacks need 2 incomes, and even with 2 incomes as a group, have lower family income and individual incomes than whites.
Okay, Professor Kilson, would you?
Well, I think there's one point to make in addition to what Professor Landry has made. That is that I think the middle class is growing in terms of the addition of qualitatively new kinds of skills, new kinds of occupations that just weren't available. I mean, 3 black lawyers who became financial managers last year brought over Beatrice Corporation. Beatrice is about a $2.8 billion corporation. You got financial managers at all level of national and international financial management on a scale heretofore, unavailable, and that's true in other fields too, in the scientific fields, computer fields, and so forth and so on.
Well, I think that the black middle class is growing, but I think that if we're headed for a recession within the next 2 years, the first people that will be the ones to have to leave the work world will be blacks. And we will regress rather than progress in our statistics, as Dr. Landry is projecting.
Yeah, but I think we will always regress relative to others. I mean,
absolutely.
It won't be back to zero.
Okay, we're really
so that's important. But I think you're right. Yeah, there's still racism around, and we have to face
that's
that.
another factor.
At the same time, it's not what it was in 1931 when I was born.
Okay. I agree with you, but I have no basis of comparison to 1931.
Right.
We want to